The next question that we have here is that as I believe that you've interviewed in the past, science interviews for Cambridge, and I was just wondering, from your experiences of interviewing applicants, what have been the biggest pitfalls that you've seen, that mistakes that students have made when they're trying to do their Cambridge interviews?
Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about the importance of
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. Today we've got a new guest with us, Michael. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much, Siam. My name is Michael Sutherland. I'm the senior tutor of this college. I'm also a physicist, and I've been involved in admissions and directing studies in natural sciences for about 20 years now.
Wow, nice. Very exciting to have a new guest on the podcast. And today we're going to be talking about a really hot topic at the moment for those applicants who are approaching the interviews period. We're going to be talking about sciences interviews for Cambridge, what students should expect, advice that we have, and also going through some previous questions that have been used for interviews in the sciences. So firstly, just for anyone who's new to Cambridge interviews and don't know too much about them, Michael, can you explain to us how similar Cambridge interviews are to normal job interviews, if they're similar at all?
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start. So Cambridge interviews have some similarities with a job interview, actually, but quite a few differences. So in a Cambridge interview, normally you would be seen by one, usually two interviewers. Sometimes they're online, sometimes they're in person. But the main point of those interviews is just to assess your academic knowledge, your interest in the subject, and especially in the sciences, whether you can apply some of the things you've learned in your school to new and unseen situations. We're trying to see if you've got the right technical skills for the course that you're applying for, and whether you'd be a good fit for our small group supervision teaching system.
Nice. So I think with what people would be thinking about with what they think of an interview normally associated with job interviews, students would be worried about what they're wearing, questions like, why do you want this job, or why do you want to study, let's say, natural sciences? Are those the kind of questions that students should be expecting in a sciences interview for Cambridge?
Yeah, I think, to address the first point about what you wear, really have no advice there. Just wear what you're comfortable in, especially if you're coming in person. It can be a bit chilly sometimes, so wear a jumper. But we're not going to be assessing you on how you dress for the interview. I think the types of questions that you would see are almost entirely related to the academic course that you're applying for. So we wouldn't be asking you any questions about extracurricular activities or sports or politics or anything not directly related to the subject you're applying for. In the sciences, some of the interview can touch on things raised in the personal statement. So for instance, if you maybe have done an EPQ in NMR, or you put down that you've read a little bit about superconductivity, maybe in physics, the interviewer, he or she might talk to you a little bit about your interest in that subject, maybe motivations for studying the course, but most of it will be taken up with actual academic type questions, physics questions, chemistry questions, math questions, that kind of thing.
Nice. An EPQ and NMR sounds really cool.
I say this because I know you're a chemist, so yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it'd be a good EPQ topic. Okay, so that's the kind of stuff that I was expecting for the interview to be more academic based. I wanted to ask you about what differences are there with the science-based interviews in Cambridge compared to the humanities interviews, because from what I know, there are a slight differences in terms of what a student should expect.
Yeah, I think in humanities interviews, it's often discussion of a text, sometimes something set in advance, or sometimes things set in your personal statement. But in a science interview, many of the interviews tend to be around solving problems together. And that's because in the sciences, and I include computer science, engineering, mathematics, natural sciences, much of the supervision teaching, so these are the small group teaching sessions we run, will be based on solving problems. So that's the sort of skills that we're trying to assess in one of these interviews. There's no identical template for one of these interviews, but the types of things that might come up, you might be given some unseen data to think about and interpret and work through. In a biology interview, maybe you'd see a specimen or a sample, some sort of image of a biological system or sample, and you kind of work through that. In natural sciences, particularly on the physical side, you might be given a physics problem or a chemistry problem or a math problem to work through. And these problems tend to be things that you wouldn't have encountered before. So they're not just something lifted straight off the A-level or IB or Scottish Higher syllabus, but they are questions that you have the necessary tools to solve. So there's not an expectation, say, that you would have to do tons and tons of extra university level physics to be able to address these problems.
Nice. So in that sense, are they kind of taking stuff that the students should have gone through, but in in a lateral way, in a new context?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. So maybe I can give an example of a question that I've asked in the past, and I'll point out I'll never use this question again because we're doing this podcast here, so it's out in public. But the question I asked was the following, and this was something I got from a really great book called Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air, and this is by somebody named David Mackay, who's was a professor here in Cambridge. And the question was the following. So some skeptics of global warming have suggested that the rise in sea levels is simply caused because there's more human activity. So more boats in the water, more people in the water. And this is what's driving, the ocean level increase. And of course, this sounds ridiculous, and it is. But there's, perhaps some truth to it, because as part of your GCSE science courses, you may have learned about Archimedes' principle. This may have been covered in A-level perhaps as well. But this is the idea that if you have a body that's immersed in water, there's a buoyant force that's equal to the weight of the object. So in other words, if somebody's swimming in the ocean, then the water level is going to rise very, very slightly. And so the question was, I asked students to estimate to within an order of 10, factor of 10, how much would sea levels rise if everybody in the earth went for a swim in the ocean at the same time. And of course, I don't really care what the answer was. And you might think, well, this has nothing to do with anything I've studied in my school. But if you start to pick apart the problem, you begin with Archimedes' principle. You have to come up with some sort of formula or estimate for the volume of water on the earth. You have to think if how much would 7 or 8 billion people, how much water would they displace, and if that was spread thinly over the oceans, what would be the amount of water depth that would increase. And in each of these steps, as an interviewer, I'd be happy to give advice to students. If they don't remember, say, the radius of the Earth, for instance, I can provide that number. But I was really interested in seeing their thought process. How do they pick apart this seemingly crazy problem, break it down into manageable steps, and apply those techniques from their school to address the problem?
Nice. Yeah, because you sent the problem over to me beforehand, and I had a think through, didn't Google anything, and I remember one of the nice things about this problem is that in a very common sense kind of way, I think most people could relate to, I don't know, making a hot chocolate and realizing that the rise of the hot chocolate is going to raise if once you put the spoon in, and you might have messed that up, and then kind of applying your kind of common sense to the situation, kind of imagining, well, you have each person has their own mass across the whole population, and then am I right in thinking that if you had the sea, the volume of the ocean, and then it's not a bad starting point to add those two masses together, and then trying to realistically work out how would that look like in the world.
Yeah. So you take the mass of all of humanity, and you work out what volume of water that would displace, and then you have to spread that additional thin volume over the whole surface of the Earth. I won't tell you the answer, but it's not a big number. Let's put it that way. So you can easily say that this is not a valid cause of the rise in sea levels that we're observing.
Because then you'd compare it to what the actual rise is.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice, interesting. So I think if a student was to listen to this podcast and leave thinking, okay, if you're applying for a science-based subject at Cambridge, your interview is probably going to be problem solving, either one problem developing or maybe two different independent problems. Would that be right for them to think?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right thing. And I would say probably most interviews would have more than one problem because, if you get stuck on that particular problem, maybe that's just bad luck, and you might really be great at a second problem. So most interviewers will try to have a variety of problems for students to try.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's interesting. That's really cool. Yeah, because you might just have some bad luck with, but it's good to have like a few chances. So one thing that prospective students they're really searching for is ways to prepare for their sciences interviews. And I was wondering if you had any advice for someone who, let's say, has a biological natural sciences interview coming up, or physical natural sciences, maths, etc. What kind of things should they do to prepare for their Cambridge interview?
Yeah, great question. I think I would advise, first of all, really making sure you're comfortable with the material that you're learning in your school. So the stuff that you've studied, perhaps at GCSE or equivalent, and even the stuff that you're studying, this term in school. So any of the new techniques that you've been taught, say in mathematics, or topics you've covered in biology. Can't guarantee that they'll come up, but certainly interviewers will start with the assumption that you've got a pretty good grounding in what you've been doing in school. Then I think it's quite useful to go out and look at these sorts of extension problems, the kinds of things that we've been talking about. And there's some great resources available out there on the web, all of them free, for people interested in the physical sciences. I think the Isaac Physics website is great, and that's got thousands of physics and maths, also chemistry and now computer science questions, as well as some biological content as well. That's a great resource. There's a wonderful website called iwanttostudyengineering.org that has similar sort of questions. No surprise there for engineers. Mathematicians might want to look at the Millennium Math Project. Computer scientists can look at a website called Project Euler. There's lots and lots of resources out there. I also think it's useful to have a look at some of the mock interview videos that are prepared by colleges and the university, just to give you a sense of that exchange between the interviewer and the student, how we help students develop their ideas and talk them through a problem.
Nice. It's interesting because a lot of the examples you gave were ones that I didn't know of, and that would have been really helpful for me when I was applying. I think with preparing for interviews, if you know anyone else who's applying for the same subject, it's a great idea to kind of work together maybe in your own time, going through a specific Isaac Newton's Trust chapter or a specific paper, and then coming together and discussing what answers you've got. It's not really, in those discussions, it's not too important about whether you got the right answer, but just practicing speaking out your ideas, because I guess that's the one the one thing that I think students forget that they need to be able to do in the interview is not just about knowing the answers, but also being able to articulate it so that the supervisor knows what you're thinking.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important thing to emphasize. And that's probably one of the common mistakes that I see in interviews, that a candidate will be really focused on delivering the exact answer, and will be trying to do a lot of things in their head and won't really be explaining their thinking as they go. And for an interviewer, there's no chance for us to interject and to help. So I think developing skills about explaining your reasoning as you go along, that can really, really help the interviewer as well. I think it's important to remember that in this situation, the interviewers aren't your adversary. You're not there trying to one up them, and they're not trying to one up you. You're working together to solve a problem, and the interviewer is going to be giving you tips and advice as you go. So if you explain your thinking clearly, that really makes the process much, much easier.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, because I've heard people say that the interviews are kind of supposed to emulate and closely to what supervision would be like. And could you kind of explain to us like what a good supervision would be, so then students know what they're trying to aim for in the interview?
Yeah, so in many science mathematics supervisions in Cambridge, students are given a sheet of problems to work on, and they tend to be reinforcing content that they've learned in the lectures. They hand these problems, written solutions to the problems in ahead of the supervision, and then you sit down with your supervisor and one or two other students, and you take these questions up. And this is a chance for you to say, well, this is how far I got in the problem, but I really got stuck here. And the supervisor can say, well, everything up to here is really good, but maybe you should have taken the derivative of this function rather than integrated it. And then the student can say, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So you're having that kind of discussion about the problem.
Nice, yeah. Because I think everyone watching will understand and like immediately agree that a supervision, like a class, your teacher's obviously not against you. The teacher's there to try to help you. And I guess the message that we're trying to get across is that in the interview is exactly the same. Whereas I think there's a pressure that the interview's trying to like trick you or try and like is your adversary, but it's not the case at all. They are the same role as if it was a supervision.
Yeah, I mean, we're there because we love our subjects and we love teaching, and we want to recruit, good students who we can work with over the 3 or 4 years there in Cambridge. So it's actually quite exciting for us as interviewers on the other side of the table.
Nice. So the next question that we have here is that, so as I believe that you've like interviewed in the past, like science interviews for Cambridge, and I was just wondering, like from your experiences of like interviewing applicants, like what have been the biggest pitfalls that you've seen, that like mistakes that students have made when they're like trying to do their Cambridge interviews?
Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about the importance of explaining your reasoning and talking through the problem out loud. So I think that's really something we have to emphasize. Some other common mistakes. I think sometimes students will, maybe they're a bit on edge. They've got some nerves, and that's understandable. But they'll jump to an answer a little bit too quickly without thinking what we're asking. So, feel free to take 5, 10, 20 seconds just to think through the question that's being asked, rather than just say the first thing that pops into your head. I mean, if you just need a little bit of time, just say, interesting, just give me a couple moments to think about this. Interviewers are happy to give that to you. The other thing I think I would mention is probably some students don't take full advantage of the advice and guidance that the interviewers are offering. So we're there, as we were talking about, kind of to help you work through a problem, or give you tips, give you advice. Try this technique, try that. Have you thought about it from this point of view? Often these are really, really helpful, and so I do encourage people to, think of those and see if they can use them to help solve the problem.
Nice. So So in those kind of situations, is it where, so if I'm a student and I'm like coming to an interview and I'm like slowly struggling, I would be right to expect the interviewer to try to give me pointers to help me get back on the right direction.
Yeah, exactly. So a student might say, well, I've got this far, and I've got an expression for the momentum, but I'm not really sure where to go from there. Can you give me some advice? And the interviewer would, usually say, well, yeah, this is great. You've got this right. Have you thought about conservation of momentum? And then hopefully the student would say, oh yeah, conservation of momentum. If I equate this to this, then maybe I can proceed. And so the interviewer, if you ask the interviewer, can you give me tips or advice? They're more than happy to do so usually.
Nice. And so would I also be right in thinking that should students feel encouraged to ask their interviewers questions if they have them?
Yeah, definitely. So certainly if something isn't clear, make sure you understand it, because you can waste time going down a wrong path. So, if the interviewer asks you something, you can say, sorry, did you mean that you wanted me to do this, or do you mean you wanted me to do that? So make sure you're clear on the instructions. And you do try and get as far as you can under your own steam.
Yeah.
But when you're really out of ideas and you're really stuck, you can ask for guidance, and the interviewer is usually happy to give that to you.
Nice. I think it's a really important point to make about at least at the start of the interview, to encourage applicants to ask questions for clarification if they find some things unclear, because I think that requires some confidence from the applicants that they might not feel like they have. And like we're here saying that if you want if you want to ask questions for clarity, definitely get those questions out of the way at the beginning to leave more time for the problem solving aspect.
Yeah, that's right.
So like from your experiences interviewing, I was wondering, everyone wants to hear what kind of things happens in in the interviews that go well, like what like a good sciences interview tends to look like.
Yeah, so it's I think students who are able to again apply those techniques from their school work to an unseen problem to make pretty good headway, to get fairly far on their own, but then who are able to take on board the tips and advice from the interviewer, think carefully about that, and then get to the next step of the problem. So it's all about that interaction between the applicant and the interviewer, demonstrating those core academic skills, and working together to get to the end of sometimes very challenging problems.
Nice. So yeah, it's not. So you could like an interview could like not be like an interview could be like a decent interview even if you like were okay with the problem solving, but you showed that you could communicate with the interviewer really well and like had some promise of like being a good learner. If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to demonstrate ability and potential for the course, because that's ultimately what we're trying to assess you on. But yeah, I mean, if the interview, if you don't quite get to the end of the problem, it doesn't go exactly the way that you want it to, but you demonstrate good problem solving skills and potential, that could be a successful interview. And one thing I should probably emphasize is that the interview is not the sort of final hurdle in the application process, and it's one of the many pieces of data that we used in our admissions decision. So we'll take into account your predicted grades, everything you put in your statement, what your teacher says about you, your assessment grades, that kind of thing, and the interview, to build up an overall picture of the student. So it's possible maybe one of your interviews doesn't go as well as you hope, but you could still be, a good applicant based on everything altogether.
And has there been offers given to someone who might have not scored amazingly in the interview, but other aspects of their profile were like fairly strong?
Yeah. I mean, I've certainly done that in the past, and then the converse is true. So maybe other aspects of the application weren't particularly strong, but the interview was really amazing. That student really demonstrated their potential for the course. They showed their core academic skills, and we thought we'd give them an offer.
Brilliant. Amazing. I think that's, unless there's any final words, but I think that we've covered everything.
Yeah, I guess, one final piece of advice, and I know this is difficult because I appreciate, this is a stressful situation, but people who get to this stage of the Cambridge application process, you're there because you're quite good at your subject, you like your subject, and you're given half an hour with two people across the table, say, who are real experts in their subject, and try to have a bit of fun.
Yeah.
This is an enjoyable academic conversation about a topic that you love. It will either go, well, you'll get an interview. It won't go well, rather an offer. It won't go well, and you won't get an offer. But regardless of that, try to enjoy the experience and have fun.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, supervisions are a lot of fun, and I guess there could be argued that the interviews, there's an opportunity for them to be similar, for sure. And yeah, as you said, it's easier said than done. But students should try to be relaxed, but also like focused, because it will affect your performance if you go into it being stressed.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you have 5 applications, so just try your best and see how it goes.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, well, thank you, Michael. Really informative conversation about sciences interviews. I'm sure a lot of students who have their interviews upcoming will find that useful. And this is going to be a start of a series of where we're going to be talking to different academics in the university with going through advice of interviews for their specific subject. So do stay tuned into the YouTube channel, the podcast, for these upcoming podcasts on interviews that will be coming shortly. So we'll see you next time.
Okay, thanks a lot.